Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of scary ghost stories from around the world, countries we don't usually get to hear about, so I hope you enjoy. I would also like you to warmly welcome our guest narrator for tonight, Fear Street, who will be narrating a story from the USA. If you enjoy his voice and work, you can follow the links in the description or at the end to find out more. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In high school in the late 2000s, I had saved up all my money from summer jobs to afford a nice trip to Italy, where I'd study abroad for a bit. Since I paid out of pocket, it was important I behaved to stay on the trip, or I would be expelled and shipped back home early, losing out on all the money I had paid, mostly hotel fees and ticket costs. Anyway, it was boys and girls separated, so we all got assigned roommates and would always be buddied up at each hotel we stopped at. I really liked my roommate. We got along well. After hitting southern Italy, we moved up north heading towards Milan. The tour bus we were on got a flat tire, and after we changed to the spare, we were told we had to stop by a neighboring town to change it to the actual tire needed. This town was in a tiny rural area where no one had cell reception because of how far out it was. The only access to the outside world was through a huge desktop computer in the concierge of an old building that was repurposed as a hotel. We checked in and began unloading our bags. Now, once we were in our rooms, we are usually locked in with tape. If you break the tape seal, you get sent home for not following the rules or sneaking out. So it's already night, and we unpack and are locked in for the night. My roommate Penny and I notice a tiny door behind our wardrobe, so we move it together and open the door. Think of Harry Potter's closet room. It was like that, but on the inside much bigger. Tons of dust inside the room, and dark as hell. Using our phones, we found a tiny light switch and yanked. All of the floor, ceiling, and walls inside were painted white, and in the middle of the room was an old hospital gurney from around the 1950s. It had brown leather straps both for the wrists and feet. So Penny crawls inside a bit because she's like 6 foot tall, and I'm going in there and she dares me to sit in it. Being the idiot that I am, I do, and she then straps me in so she can take a picture. The entire time we're laughing and cracking up, when the gurney suddenly moves with me on it. I scream, and Penny runs to set me free. As we exit towards the doorway, we notice the gurney moves again, violently towards us, and we rush out the room and seal it with the wardrobe. For the next 3 hours, we hear footsteps and the gurney slam against the tiny door. I couldn't sleep, so I said screw it, and we opened our window and shimmied the balcony to the 2nd floor to get our friends in the other room to not break the seal. We tell them what happened and everyone was spooked. Our teacher hears us making a commotion and rushes over to the room we were in and asks what the noise was about. We explain in full detail what happened, and Penny is as white as a ghost. She's been quiet this whole time. The teacher doesn't believe us and threatens to send us home first thing in the morning for our behavior, so I challenged my teacher and told her I will dispute this with the student board unless she goes in and sees for herself. She then went into the room, and after 2 minutes returned and said we could stay in the room with the others. Her face was a mix of horrified and confused. Upon checkout, we asked about the room, and the innkeepers acted confused, saying they didn't know what we were talking about. The teachers refused to speak about the incident with us. The rest of the trip was a blur, seeing how Penny and I couldn't sleep at night for days after that. I've seen a lot of people share their paranormal experiences and thought I'd share my own. To this day, the hairs will still stand on the back of my neck when I think about it, and I don't wish that on anyone. I live in Finland, and in 2014, I bought an apartment building that had been constructed shortly after World War II in the early 1950s. My hometown was almost completely destroyed during the war when the Germans withdrew and burnt everything behind them. so very little remains from before that time. I don't know what stood on the plot of land before the war, but I liked the building and the apartment immediately. The apartment itself wasn't large, but comfortable. The previous owner had divided part of the living room into a sleeping area using ceiling-mounted curtains, which I kept. My bed sat behind those curtains, making the space feel more private and closed off. There were no vents or windows near the bed, and once the curtains were drawn, the sleeping area felt fairly sealed from the rest of the apartment. At some point, I began noticing small, strange things. As I was falling asleep, I would sometimes feel a cool breeze on my face. That didn't make much sense, given how enclosed the sleeping space was, so I assumed it had to be my imagination. Around that time, I was dealing with health issues and already had trouble sleeping, so I didn't dwell on it too much. Then, the sleep paralysis started. I had experienced it occasionally in other places I'd lived, but here it became frequent. I would wake up unable to move, with a strong sense that something was watching me. Years earlier, a therapist had told me that trying to make a sound or speak could break the sleep paralysis, and that still worked. But the episodes were deeply unsettling. Sometimes as I drifted off, I had the impression that someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. But again, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Despite all of this, I never felt threatened in that apartment. It didn't feel hostile, just strange. If life hadn't changed the way it did, I think I might still be living there. By 2022, after spending the entire COVID lockdown working from home in that space, I felt worn down. The apartment began to feel cramped, and I think I needed a change. I ended up moving to a larger apartment in a part of town I'd always wanted to live in. The building was newer, from the late 1960s, and I moved in that summer. On the first or second night there, I had an unusually vivid nightmare. In the dream, something was in my bedroom with me. I couldn't clearly identify what it was, only that it was small, roughly the size of a child. I sat up in bed and saw it dart behind a clothes rack I had placed in the corner while unpacking. Then it vanished. I woke up shaken, genuinely believing for a moment that someone was still in the room. I turned on the lights and checked, but of course nothing was there. That was the only dream like that I've ever had in this apartment. What struck me later was what didn't happen after I moved. Since leaving the old apartment, I haven't experienced sleep paralysis even once. My current bedroom is more open, the bed is closer to the window, and there's nothing enclosing the space the way it was before, and I've never felt that unexplained breeze on my face since. Sometimes I wonder if that dream was something following me, and then deciding not to stay. The corner where the clothes rack stood pointed in the direction of my old apartment, which I can't help but notice. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it's all a coincidence. I sold the old apartment that autumn. I don't know who lives in there now. I wonder if anyone staying there has noticed the things that I have. My name is Paulo. I'm 30 years old and live in Ouro Preto, Brazil, a city built on centuries of mining slavery and death, stretching back to the 1500s. The house I live in now isn't old by local standards, less than 50 years old, built on land that only became available around the time of its construction. And as far as I'm aware, no one had lived on the plot before my family. What makes this harder to explain is that everything I've experienced has happened in one place, only my bedroom, and only ever at night. The first thing that ever happened goes back to when I was a teenager, about 17. I was home alone, sitting at my computer playing Skyrim. It's not a horror game, nothing even remotely frightening. At some point, I felt that sudden, unmistakable sensation that someone was watching me. When I turned around, I saw something retreating into my father's bedroom. It wasn't a person. It looked like a small, white shape, almost like a ball pulling itself away. Even after it vanished, there was still a faint shadow of light, like something had just passed through the doorway. I didn't hesitate. I jumped up and followed it immediately, heart pounding, already terrified. I searched my father's bedroom, then the bathroom connected to it. But there was nothing and no one, nowhere to hide. I stood there shaking, then went back to my room and shut the door, even though I knew that it wouldn't change anything. Years passed, and the experiences didn't stop. At night while sleeping, I began to feel something touching me. Sometimes it felt like arms around my body. I would wake up frozen and completely paralyzed, my mind screaming while my body refusing to move. I could feel weight on my chest, and in that half-awake state, I would see something standing over me, its feet planted on me as I stared down. It would take minutes, long, agonizing minutes before I could finally gather the courage to jerk my elbow violently, lashing out at whatever was there. And then nothing. I told myself it must be sleep paralysis. That explanation only went so far, though. One night I brought a girl home. We were in my bedroom watching a movie, relaxed and comfortable. When we turned off the light to sleep, the atmosphere changed instantly. I should probably mention that my mother used to decorate my room with small ornaments, artificial plants, birds set into stone, but without warning, one of those birds fell straight down onto a wooden table. The sound was sharp and loud. The girl grabbed me, digging her nails into my arm, shaking, and I laughed it off, telling her that the ornament simply must not have been placed properly. 5 minutes later, the ironing board, which had been securely leaning between the wall and my closet, fell violently onto the closet itself. That was enough. She asked me to take her home. Another night, there was a loud knock on my bedroom door. It wasn't subtle. In the morning, I asked my parents and brother if any of them had knocked during the night. All of them had heard it, but none of them had left their beds. Around this time, I began experiencing something else. When I closed my eyes, it felt like a bright lantern was being held directly in front of my face, like staring into the sun through my eyelids. I went through extensive neurological testing, but the doctors found nothing wrong. Around the same period, I started hearing whispering, not voices I could understand, just murmurs in an unfamiliar language, close enough to feel intimate, far enough to remain unclear. On March 30th, I woke up at exactly 2:45 a.m. My blanket was at my feet, neatly pulled away. I never sleep like that, and it wasn't hot. Later that day, while drifting in and out of sleep, I felt myself gently being pushed, as if someone were testing whether I were awake. The most horrifying experiences came later. Twice I heard whispering conversations in my room, multiple voices hushed and distant at first. The whispers grew louder, while still remaining whispers, as if they were moving closer and closer. Then without warning they became a scream, not just loud but overwhelming. With my eyes squeezed shut and my hands pressed over my ears, I could still feel hands on my face. I could feel a presence screaming directly into me, inches away. The second time it happened, I turned onto my side and pulled the blankets over my head, but it didn't help. The most recent event happened on the 7th of April. I was fully awake, lying in bed playing Sudoku on my phone, waiting to fall asleep, when suddenly I heard a whisper right beside me. Just one sound that was soft and clear. I started crying immediately. It was the first time I'd heard something like that while completely awake. In my full psychological evaluation, I was told that I was healthy, mentally. There's no medical explanation. If I'm not imagining this, if I'm not insane, then whatever this is has been with me for years, and it has never left my bedroom. This happened when I was 9 years old in 1994 in Brazil. At the time, my parents had just bought a small house. Before that, we had been renting, so everything about this place still felt new. The house was simple, 2 bedrooms with a single bathroom between them. At night, my mother always left the bathroom door open with the light on. The soft glow would spill into both bedrooms. It was just enough to help if someone woke up thirsty or needed the bathroom in the dark. There's another important detail. My father worked out of state, and sometimes even out the country, so we only saw him every few months. When he was gone, I slept in my mother's bed. When he was home, I shared a room with my sibling instead. I had an older sister, 5 years older than me, and a brother, 7 years older. The bedroom my sister and I shared had 2 single beds. One bed was pushed into a corner, and the other sat close to the center of the room. There was about 3 feet of space between them. When I slept in that room, I lay at the foot of my sister's bed, positioned opposite her head. One night I was laying there asleep, facing towards my brother's bed across the room, and at some point I woke up. I didn't hear a noise or feel a movement. I just opened my eyes, and the moment I did, I saw her. Right in front of me, incredibly close, was what looked like a woman kneeling beside the bed, leaning forward and staring at me. She wasn't across the room or standing in a doorway. She was right there, within arm's reach. I was instantly terrified. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. Even though my siblings were asleep in that same room, I felt completely alone, somehow without any doubt. I knew this wasn't a person. I knew it was something supernatural. I closed my eyes tightly, convinced that when I opened them again she would be gone. But when I opened them, she was still there. My stomach felt ice cold, like it had dropped out my body. My heart was racing so hard it felt painful. The only thing I could make out clearly was her shape, long, straight hair, dark and solid. The light from the bathroom passed through the strands outlining her head and shoulders, but despite how close she was, I couldn't see her face, no eyes or features or expression. I couldn't even tell what she was wearing, just a black shape in the form of a woman. I didn't know what else to do. Slowly I turned my back to her, squeezed my eyes shut, and stayed completely still. I didn't move again, until eventually I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. The next morning I told my mother everything. She believed me, didn't laugh or dismiss it, and somehow that made it feel even more real. After that night, that bedroom became the worst place in the house for me. It took years before I could sleep there again without fear. Something else happened later that made it even harder to forget. One afternoon, my sister was taking a nap in that same room after school. When she woke up, she was terrified, saying that someone had hit her on the back. My mother had been outside at the time. It was just the 2 of them in the house. When my mum lifted my sister's shirt, her back was red, marked as if she had been struck. For many years I thought what I saw was just a ghost. But about 2 years ago I started watching videos about shadow people, and I realized I had misunderstood what they were. I always thought shadow figures were flat like silhouettes, but people described them as fully 3-dimensional, human-shaped, solid black. And that description fit exactly what I saw. A woman-shaped figure entirely dark, standing or kneeling right in front of me. That night has never left me, and it never will. This happened a few months ago, while my boyfriend and I were staying in a hotel during a trip to Romania. I'm Romanian, and we were visiting so I could see my parents and spend some time back in the country. One evening at around 8 or 9, we were both relaxed in our hotel room. My boyfriend was stretched out on the bed, casually playing Angry Birds on my phone while I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. The bathroom door was only half closed, just enough to keep a bit of privacy while still letting me see into the room. Right next to the bathroom door was another door, one of those odd, always locked hotel doors that didn't seem to belong to the room itself, but was some kind of staff access, or maybe even a connection to another room. But it never opened, and I never saw anyone use it. As I stood at the sink washing my hands, I suddenly felt a presence near the doorway. It was that instinctive sensation you get when someone is standing close to you, even if you haven't seen them yet. Without really thinking about it, I assumed it was my boyfriend waiting to use the bathroom. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shadowy figure passed by, emerging from the direction of that locked door and moving across the room towards where my boyfriend was lying on the bed. It wasn't fast, and the moment I registered it, my body froze. I didn't fully turn, didn't move my head, but just stood there, heart racing suddenly. The figure wasn't solid or clear. It looked vaguely like a man wearing a business suit, but blurred, indistinct, like the edges didn't fully exist. More like a silhouette than a person, but not flat. As soon as I was gone, I rushed out the bathroom and told my boyfriend what I'd just seen. He looked confused and told me he hadn't noticed anything at all. He hadn't seen anyone pass by, hadn't felt a presence, hadn't sensed anything strange in the room at all. But I couldn't shake the feeling. To me it felt very real, like someone had been there, paused briefly and then walked away. Even after everything went back to normal, the atmosphere felt off, as if something unseen had passed through our space and left no trace behind except the memory of it. I still don't know what it was, but I know what I saw. And more than that, I know what I felt. Someone once asked me to visit an old Art Nouveau mansion in Eastern Germany. He had lived there as a tenant, but the actual owner refused to stay in the building himself. He was afraid of it. At first, I didn't understand why. I loved the architecture immediately. Elegant lines, ornate details, that's craftsmanship that you just don't get anymore. And as I stepped up the main entrance, something strange happened. The moment I tried to cross the threshold, my head jerked backwards violently, like my body was rejecting the idea of going inside. I nearly fell outwards onto the steps. It felt instinctive and automatic, like my brain itself didn't want to enter. I shook it off and went in anyway. Inside, everything looked beautiful. Flowery stained glass doors, high ceilings, tall windows that filled the room with muted light. Nothing felt wrong at first. We walked through the house calmly, admiring the interior until we went down into the basement. The basement was unusual, still tall with windows and plenty of space. I even commented that it could be converted into a nice apartment. It was around 120 square meters, but as I stood in one particular doorway, something changed instantly. A sensation crept up from my feet, rising through my legs like ice. Goosebumps exploded across my entire body. My stomach dropped. I felt a violent, invasive urge, an overwhelming thought that I needed to dig into the ground beneath the doorway, to dig it out, to tear it open. I remember thinking that even if my fingernails tore off and my flesh peeled away, I had to get whatever was buried there out. And that was the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. Those were not my thoughts. I panicked. I told the person I was with, without fully understanding why, not to tell anyone what I'd felt and that something evil was buried there. The main entrance of the house, I later realized, was positioned directly above the basement doorway. Whatever was beneath it was aligned with the front door itself. And after that visit, things followed me home. At night in my own house, I would suddenly feel pressure in my chest, like a hand pressing directly onto my heart. It felt insistent and demanding. The same urge returned, telling me to dig it out. I would scream out loud saying no. Then one night at around 2 a.m., I was in bed reading with my bedside lamp on. I was relaxed. My cat lay peacefully at my feet. Suddenly he lifted his head and stared at the door handle without blinking. His body went completely still. and I followed his gaze. The door handle began to move. It pushed downwards, held there with force. This wasn't possible under normal circumstances. The spring in that handle is strong. It snaps back instantly, and the door closes hard. But this time, the handle stayed pressed down as the door slowly opened into the dark hallway beyond. No one was there. The hallway was empty. 2 walls framed the doorway. There was nowhere for someone to stand unseen. The house was locked. Windows, doors, everything, no sound, no footsteps. My cat never moved. He never blinked. For 12 or 15 seconds that felt like an eternity, the handle remained held down. Then just as slowly it released, and the handle rose back into place. I turned on every light and checked the entire house. All doors were closed. The attic stairs were wooden and loud. No one could have moved without making a noise. Nothing explained what I had seen. Days later it happened again, in broad daylight. It was around 2 p.m. I was sitting on my bed, my cat was on me. Once again, he locked his eyes onto the door handle, and once again it moved on its own. Pressed down, held. The door opened fully. No one there, then it released. After that, I tied the door shut with a nail and string. I was terrified of it happening again. Until then, I believed daytime was safe. These experiences shattered that belief completely. I began protecting myself however I could. I placed Himalayan salt jars throughout the house, crystals, amethysts. I smoked out every room and spoke every protective and banishing prayer I could aloud. Eventually it stopped. A psychologist later told me I must have dreamed it, but I didn't. I was awake. My damn cat witnessed it twice. I later learned more about the mansion. The owners had been involved in occult practices. There were 3 related buildings, one reportedly used as a Masonic lodge, later associated with groups like the Thule Society. In the stained glass of the Art Nouveau doors, written in cursive yellow lettering, were the words, "Power to the Evil." I had never been inside that building before. I had no way of knowing there was a door beneath the main entrance directly above where I felt it in the cellar. I never contacted the new owners. I want nothing to do with it. Whatever is buried there is very real, and I believe it is evil. Years ago, I was on holiday in France with my family and a few close friends. We were staying in a beautiful holiday home, completely isolated, with no nearby neighbors or traffic noise, just us, the house, and a quiet stretch of beautiful French countryside. The place was warm and inviting, spotlessly clean and well cared for. From the moment we arrived, it felt comfortable and safe. But one night, long after everyone had gone to bed, that sense of calm shattered. All the bedrooms were upstairs, and all 7 of us were asleep, when suddenly a deafening crash tore through the house. It sounded exactly like a heavy kitchen shelf collapsing, pots, pans, and cutlery smashing onto the hardwood floor all at once. The noise was violent, sharp, and metallic, echoing through the stairwell. And as you can imagine, it woke up every single one of us. Within seconds, doors were opening and people were stepping out into the upstairs hallway, confused and frightened, all of them asking the same thing. What the hell was that? There was no doubt about where the sound had come from. It was downstairs inside the house. My dad, one of our friends, and I went down first. As we reached the kitchen, we braced ourselves. But there was nothing. The kitchen was exactly as it had been earlier that evening. Every pot and pan was still neatly stacked or hanging in place. The cutlery was organized, untouched. No shelves were broken, nothing had fallen. The floor was clear, doors still locked and windows undisturbed. We stood there in silence, looking at one another, trying to make sense of it. There were no neighboring houses where the sound could have come from. No outside activity either, and the noise we heard was unmistakably inside the house, too close and too loud and too real to simply dismiss away. To this day I still think about that night. 7 people hearing the same noise, which, by all accounts, had no explanation. What do you all think?
I always believed my old childhood home was haunted, as me, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my aunt had all had experiences there. Those are just the ones I explicitly know of. There's likely more people who've experienced things as well. My grandfather worked his butt off to build the home and get everything set up, and we were inclined to believe he kept watch over us regularly after his tragically early passing. None of his grandchildren ever got the chance to meet him. However, according to my mom, I'd seen him sitting on his old wooden stereo that spanned the length of our dining room wall when I was a toddler. I don't remember that experience because of how young I was. I asked her, "Who is that man there?" And she responded with, "What man?" And I walked over to him, acted as if I was patting his leg, and said, "It's okay, I see you." If I recall correctly, I think I even pointed him out in a picture as the person that I had seen. There were several other mostly minor instances that weren't too difficult to rationalize that occurred to all of us, but I'll share the spookiest thing that ever happened to me during my middle school years. One night, I kept hearing creaks, cracks, and knocks near my bedroom door and in the hallway just beyond it. My bed was positioned where I couldn't see directly into the hallway, and my door had to remain open to supply heat to the rest of the house, as the vent in my room worked better than any of the others. These noises occasionally happen for small stretches some nights, and I don't know exactly how to describe their frequency, but I'll say they always seemed deliberate and relatively intelligent, like whatever was making the noises was acutely aware of if I was paying attention to it or not. The noises would usually die down when I actively listened to or looked for them, and if I outright ignored them, they'd usually stop after a bit, or I'd just fall asleep in spite of them, which was admittedly rare because this spooked me a lot as a kid. This particular night, however, they were a bit more aggressive, almost like there was a certain excitement to them. They continued for a few hours in the middle of the night while everyone else was asleep. I'd say roughly from 10 or 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. is when this took place. I couldn't sleep at all, and every time I started to drift off, the noises became much heavier, so I figured I'd read a book to make me as sleepy as possible. I grabbed a Bible and read the most boring passages I could find. I was to the point where I was drifting off with the overhead light on, and me on my side with my head propped up in my hand. And every single time I began to doze, I'd be woken up by these noises. I'd finally had enough, and decided I'd sleep in my mom's room if she'd let me. It always felt like her room was afforded a certain sense of privacy, further lending to our theory of it being my grandfather. This is where things went from, I can maybe rationalize this, to, this is freaking insane. I closed the book, set it on my nightstand, got up, and began walking to the door when I started hearing crinkling behind me. Now, us kids had ruined a mattress or two in the past by spilling stuff on them, so the plastic wrapping was left on our current ones for easier cleanup, and to avoid having to buy new ones in such cases. Now, sometimes there'd absolutely be a little crinkling heard after getting up off of it, but this time it was quite a bit louder and lasted longer. I got to my door, realized it was still crinkling, and my curiosity got the better of me. I turned around, and I could see the material moving on the side of the mattress. There was an impression in it moving from the lower end up towards the headboard, like someone was brushing up against it, walking by. I immediately said, "Nope," got the hell out of there, and as I was speed walking down the hallway, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I got to my mom's room at the other end of the house, woke her up, and asked, "Can I sleep in here tonight?" She asked, "Why? What's wrong?" And I stammered, saying, I don't know. There's something out there. She said, "Well, do you have your pillow? 'Cause you're not taking mine." I didn't, so I went back to get one of mine. When I approached the hallway, the footsteps started up again, but directly behind me this time. Again, curiosity got to me. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, but part of me was also hoping with every fiber of my being that I could find a rational explanation. I stopped halfway down the hallway and listened, thinking, maybe it's just the echo of my own footsteps or something, even though I'd never once heard an echo in that house. As soon as I stopped, I heard another 2 steps behind me that sounded like they were getting closer to me. I stayed still for a split second, but when I realized that the second step I had heard after I stopped was maybe a foot away from me, and the first one was farther away, meaning I was being followed, I stopped worrying about not waking anyone else up. I sprinted to my bed, snatched a pillow up, and sprinted back to my mom's room, hearing extra footsteps in the hallway all the way until I got close to her door. I fell asleep probably close to half an hour later, and the next day I tried to just let it go. Not necessarily forget about it, but just let it not get to me. After all, I never felt explicitly threatened by a presence in the house. Been spooked a few times, but that was the closest it ever felt like it was specifically messing with me. I didn't realize it until after getting back home from school the next afternoon and hearing my mom on the phone that it had been my grandma's birthday. Something that I learned years later as an adult and living in a different house was that my grandfather always loved celebrating and making a big deal of my grandma's birthday. Maybe he was just celebrating that particular night, or in his own way preparing for her birthday the next day. But certain things began to make a lot of sense in hindsight. At least, as much as they can for something paranormal. As around that time of year was when I would tend to have more of my unexplained experiences.
This happened in 2016. At the time, I was an engineering student in India. As part of an academic program, 4 of us were sent to a small remote village to install solar panels. The panels were meant for a goddess Kali temple that stood right beside a burning gut, the Hindu cremation ground. I knew the legends surrounding Kali, how she often associates with spirits and the dead. But I never put much faith in those stories. I wasn't a believer in the supernatural then. The temple itself was isolated. To reach the village's main road, you had to walk about 15 minutes along a narrow, uneven dirt path, barely 2 feet wide in places. On either side were endless paddy fields stretching out into the darkness with nothing else around. We worked for 2 days straight. By the evening of the second day, we were almost done, when we realized we'd run out of black insulating tape for the wiring. The nearest shop was on the main road, and without much thought, I volunteered to go get it. It was a full moon night. There were no street lights or lamps, only the moon hanging bright in the sky. I put my earphones in and began walking down the bumpy path alone. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I felt something grab my arm and yank it hard. I instinctively jerked my hand free and spun around. But there was nothing there. No one, no movement, just the empty path, the fields, and the moonlight. I froze where I stood. I don't know how long I stayed like that, too shocked to move. Eventually, a man came riding past on a bicycle. He noticed me standing there and stopped to ask what was wrong. I told him what had happened. He listened carefully, then asked me a strange question. If I had climbed onto the roof of the temple. When I said I had, he nodded grimly and explained that in Hindu beliefs, standing on top of a goddess's head is considered deeply disrespectful. He went on to tell me about other incidents, people feeling touched, pulled, or following in that same area. He even mentioned a local villager who once went missing and later returned with no memory of where he had been. That man, whoever he was, walked with me to the shop, waited while I bought the tape, and then accompanied me all the way back to the temple. Only when I was safely with my friends did he leave. I still don't know what happened that night. The setting was eerie enough to make anyone uneasy, and maybe my mind filled in the gaps. But before that moment I had never believed in anything supernatural. And what I felt, the grip on my arm and the force behind it, was undeniably real. A few years ago when I was 20, I met an American backpacker at a bus station in Paris. His name was Lucas and he was 27. We had some time to kill before our bus, so we sat down and started talking. He was an adventurer at heart. He'd spent 6 months in the US, in his hometown of Montana where he lived with his mother, and then 6 months traveling the world, on foot or by sailboat. He told me he was a marine engineer, or rather that he developed types of rope for navigation, something like that. We clicked pretty well, so we exchanged Facebook contacts and stayed in touch. It was quite an unexpected encounter, because this guy had tons of adventure stories, and he came from the US, which for a little European like me sounded really exotic. It felt like I was meeting someone who lived in an adventure movie, a world full of mysteries and fiction, where crazy things always happen. Back then I had just started university and didn't really have many friends. It was winter, I was in a new city, and I wasn't really someone who liked going out at night or concerts yet, so I spent most of my time at home, listening to music, watching series, drawing or playing video games. Lucas and I talked frequently. He was back in the US at that time, and because of the time difference we would get into the habit of talking very late at night. Sometimes I wouldn't go to bed until 3 a.m. or even later. He would tell me of his adventures. Every day he had new stories, like the time when he went solo hiking in the mountains and came face to face with a pack of coyotes and had to shoot his pistol to get away. I thought his life was totally crazy. But as the stories went on, things started to feel stranger and stranger. Like I said, he was a sailor. He told me he often sailed from Florida to the Caribbean. Sometimes he took people with him, sometimes he did it alone. One day he told me he'd met the Flying Dutchman. At first I burst out laughing, but he was completely serious. So half joking I told him to go on, and he described every detail. How the weather suddenly changed. How this huge, dark ship he was approaching didn't show up on his radar. He said his first reaction was to think it was a drifting ship, that something went very wrong with the boat crew, so he approached it. The ship looked very old. He couldn't see anyone aboard, but he could hear music coming from it. I don't remember exactly what kind, and in any case he was alone, and he admitted he panicked. Something was very off with the ship. He took the helm and moved away. But that was just the beginning of the crazy stories he told me. After that, I didn't really know what to think of our conversations. It was the first time someone told me a paranormal story with such seriousness, and especially such a wild one. I was more fascinated than skeptical. Something about our connection was captivating. It was more an escape from the somewhat dull reality of my small provincial town. We called each other almost every night, and he told me anecdotes about his life, most of them quite believable. Part of me didn't believe his Flying Dutchman story, but I wanted to see how far he would go. I thought I'd make my mind up later. I wasn't closed off to the paranormal. I'd actually experienced weird things myself when I was younger, but this was a bit beyond the I hear weird noises in my attic at night level. Do you know about the Wendigo? I never heard of it until Lucas apparently actually met it. One of his best childhood friends was Native American. He came from a part of the US where traditions are still strong, but I didn't know enough about the topic to really discuss it. So he knew these kind of folk stories well. With this friend, they would go about once a year into nature, to hike, camp or whatever, for about a week to 10 days. One day, after 2 or 3 days of hiking in the forest, they decide to camp. They make fire, ate, then had a drink. Night was falling. They were in the middle of a talk when suddenly Lucas felt a presence around the fire. He saw a figure, a blurred body shape sitting next to them. His friend gestured for him to look at him. He seemed to say no with his eyes, which Lucas understood as look at me, not the figure. They looked at each other while trying to ignore this new presence. They were scared. His friend had tears in his eyes. It lasted a few minutes. Then they realized the figure had disappeared. Later they talked about the experience. His friend said it wasn't the first time he had encountered a Wendigo. He advised Lucas not to look at it, because the creature feeds on the attention it's given. If ignored, it disappears. When he told me that, it was late at night. I didn't dare move. He even joked, maybe the Wendigo's in your attic. At the time, I had a small attic in my apartment, and I remember feeling really uneasy, and I had trouble falling asleep and stayed awake till morning. Hearing someone say these kind of stories without much sincerity was very unsettling. But back to when I said that Lucas partially lived with his mother in a town in Montana, in an old house built during colonial times. Well, he told me this house was haunted, but he always talked about it very calmly, as if it were a normal part of everyday life. He said he and his mother had always known the house was haunted, and that they constantly had paranormal manifestations, and it had become part of their rhythm. He was basically saying that you just have to learn to live with it, and respect all the souls who lived there before you. According to him, it was a matter of balance. He said there was one place in the house where he really didn't feel well, and where he no longer set foot. In the basement, apparently, when he was a kid, he'd felt a very hostile presence, and even saw a face watching him in the dark. There was a kind of big black stain on a brick wall, and all the energy seemed to come from that wall. Since then, he tries as much as possible to not go down the basement. Since he said his house was haunted, I asked him to give me a video tour. It was night here, and afternoon there. He showed me weird stuff. For example, he and his mother had placed small bowls of salt around the house, and there were also mirrors on the windowsills. All that was linked to the house's energy, as I remember. He continued the tour and said, well, what often happens is the lights turn off by themselves. Oh look, they're on now. So my mum and I got into the habit of turning them off as soon as we passed by. He entered the living room, showed me a big solid wooden sideboard, and said the drawers were always left open, so they got used to closing them when they passed by. The drawers were indeed open, so he shut them. One drawer contained nothing but a Bible. I remember it was just a funny coincidence to me at the time. Anyway, at one point he took me into the hallway, where there was a trap door in the floor leading to the basement. Said basement, where they were afraid of. He didn't open the trapdoor but approached it to show me. And here comes the moment I'm trying to approach. When he got closer, the video on my phone screen started to crackle. Colored lines, blue and red, appeared on my screen, and the sound went completely distorted. The image was choppy, almost frozen, and I heard a heavy, low buzzing. When the image went back to normal a few seconds later, Lucas was in his bedroom. He had gotten scared and run away. Did you see what just happened? Yeah, I said. First time I've ever seen anything like that. He wasn't exactly calm, but not in shock either. While I was terrified, my heart was racing, but my body completely still. I just couldn't move. While it was happening thousands of kilometers away from me, it felt so real. It was there with me. It really touched me to see him like this. I mean, unsettled by something. He was usually very impressive and confident and cool-headed. He just said, well, I told you my house was haunted. Like all of this was perfectly pedestrian. At that moment, my thoughts were spinning. I thought back to how all his crazy stories, the damn Flying Dutchman, the Wendigo, I had taken all of these with a grain of salt and tried to analyze it rationally. To be honest, I thought he was a bit eccentric, maybe a bit of a liar, but harmless, and his stories amused me, without having to necessarily believe in them. But then I started to doubt and wonder if all of this was really true. While he sat on his bed in his room, and calm returned, we started talking about something else, when suddenly I heard a noise. At first, I didn't understand what it was, but then it became clear. It was a voice, a very deep voice, almost inhuman, reciting something in a language I didn't understand. I was studying linguistics at the time, and I was very interested in human languages, but this one was impossible to identify. If I had to compare it, I'd say it sounded like a monk reciting a prayer, deep, monotone, and very solemn. Lucas heard it too. But oddly, I think I heard it louder than he did. I asked him if he heard the noise and he said he had, then went towards the source. He got to his living room and the sound came from his Bluetooth speaker lying on the floor against a wall charging, but it was turned off. He fiddled with the speaker and the sound stopped. And then barely a second later, I heard another voice, this time a recognizable voice in English. It was the TV, the news was on, and I asked if the TV had been on before and he said no, that it had just turned itself on. He turned it off, and nothing else happened after that. We kept talking occasionally. Then I met the person who became my ex at the time, so naturally I changed habits and started spending a lot of time with him. And Lucas and I drifted apart. But I still think about this story often. I'm writing this while I'm still at our family cabin deep in the forests of Sweden. It's old and surrounded by trees and completely isolated from anything resembling a town. I'm sleeping on the first floor. My parents are settled on the opposite side of the house, and a few other relatives are upstairs on the second floor. We're here for Christmas and will be staying for several more days. The house is quiet now. I fell asleep around midnight and woke up at 1:30 a.m. But not abruptly. I woke up feeling unusually good, calm and clear. I've been doing a lot of inner and shadow work lately, and the night before I had felt like I had released a huge amount of emotional weight that I had been carrying for a long time. When I woke up, that sense of peace was still there. It felt deep and genuine, like my body and mind were perfectly aligned for once. I called softly to my cat. He jumped up on the bed and curled against me, purring louder than I'd ever heard him purr before. It was like he was responding to that calm energy. I lay there petting him for several minutes, enjoying the moment, until suddenly he stopped. He jumped down off the bed without warning, and his purring cut out completely. At the same time, I felt something strange in my throat, an odd electric sensation like a low current humming under my skin. The air in the room seemed to change almost instantly. It felt denser and noticeably colder, as if the warmth had been pulled out of the space. My cat jumped back onto my chest, but this time he wasn't relaxed. I pet him again, and he started purring, but it sounded different, more cautious. In the dim light of the room, I could see the mirror on the wall and the bedroom door, which was half open. My cat's attention snapped away from me. His head began turning slowly, tracking something I couldn't see. He looked towards the doorway, then towards the opposite side of the room, then back again, following movement that wasn't visible to me. That's when I noticed the sounds. They were subtle. Creaks, faint shifting noises. It'd be fair to say that those are the sounds you expect in an old house that had been built sometime in the 1850s, but something was off. Those sounds usually come with wind or temperature changes. Tonight, the forest outside was completely still, and yet the sounds were there. And my cat reacted to each one precisely, staring at the exact spot the sound seemed to be coming from. Goosebumps spread across my arms and legs. Then I saw the lights. They were small and faint, barely there at first. One appeared in the mirror, like a soft reflection that didn't belong to anything in the room. Another drifted past the open doorway from the hallway. A third hovered inside the room itself. They were subtle, almost greenish. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, but distinct enough that I knew I was seeing them. The air felt thick. Every breath carried static, and my body felt tense and charged as if I were breathing electricity. For a moment, I considered getting up and turning on the light, but something in me decided not to move. I stayed still, focusing on keeping myself grounded, trying not to panic. The room remained cold. My chest felt tight. My cat stayed rigid, eyes fixed on something unseen. Then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The heaviness lifted, the air felt normal again, the lights were gone. The sounds faded into silence. My cat jumped down from the bed, and walked out the room without looking back. It's still cold in here, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep without taking something to calm myself. I'm shaken, but I don't feel threatened anymore. Whatever was happening feels finished now. The room feels empty again. I've never experienced anything like this before, not even close. I'm relieved it's over, and strangely proud of myself for staying calm through it. My cat being there helped me more than I can explain, even though watching him react to something I couldn't see was terrifying. I don't know what it was, but I'm just glad it passed. This happened back in 2014, when I was 12 years old. It was the first truly unsettling experience of my life, and even now, years later, it still feels vivid when I think about it. I'm from India, and every summer my family followed the same routine. My mother and her sister would take me to stay at my maternal grandparents' house for a few weeks. It was something I always looked forward to, and that summer seemed to be no different than the first. One afternoon around noon, I watched a casual horror movie. It wasn't particularly scary, more intriguing than anything, and I didn't think much of it afterwards. The day passed as normal, and in the evening my aunt and I went up to the terrace to water plants. The sun was beginning to set, and the air was still warm. Out of curiosity, and probably influenced by the movie, I asked her the following question. "You've lived here long. Has there been any paranormal stuff around here in the neighborhood?" She hesitated. I noticed it immediately. At first she tried to brush it off, but I kept asking, and finally she gave in. She pointed towards a house across the street. "Do you see that house?" she said. "The one just to the right of the one directly in front of us?" I nodded. "Years ago, there was a woman living there who was abnormal. We think she was possessed." She told me how people used to hear screaming coming from that house, piercing screams one day, deep demonic roars the next. She said the woman's eyes would turn blood red, her behavior completely uncontrollable. Her voice would change into something heavy and grunting, and at times she even attacked people. No one knew what to do with her. By the time my aunt finished, I was terrified. "It doesn't happen anymore, right?" I asked quickly. She reassured me that it had stopped 3 or 4 years earlier, after the woman's family had taken her to a sacred temple to cleanse whatever presence had been afflicting her. I felt some relief, but it was thin. From that moment on, a sense of unease settled in my chest. That night, as usual during summer power outages, we slept on the terrace. Before going to sleep, everyone played board games under an open sky. Around 11 p.m, we lay down on our bedding, and by 11:30, the terrace had gone completely quiet. There were no voices, no movement, just the soft sound of wind and leaves rustling in the distance. And then a scream tore through the night. A woman's scream that was long and loud and filled with agony. Everyone jolted awake. I sat up, heart pounding. Around us, lights flicked on as neighbors rushed out onto their terraces, and every person was staring in the same direction. No prizes for guessing which house we were staring at. As the scream faded, something worse followed. A deep, guttural demonic voice echoed through the night. It didn't sound human. The voice went on for nearly a minute, speaking in a language I couldn't recognize. It felt like something that shouldn't exist in the open air. No one moved. Everyone stood frozen, staring, and then it stopped. The silence afterwards was unbearable. My entire body was covered in goosebumps, and I was shaking. That night, I slept pressed close to my grandfather, who kept a thick wooden stick beside him while he slept. Even with him there, I barely slept at all. The next morning, the unease was worse. It felt like something bad was lingering, like the air itself was poison. I tried to distract myself by playing games, doing homework, but I couldn't focus. All I wanted to do was leave. That evening, my uncle, my father's brother, called and asked if I wanted to go with him to the nearby temple. I knew how sacred the place was, and how closely it was associated with the goddess. The thought of being somewhere holy made me agree instantly. We left on a road trip, but even as we traveled, that uneasy feeling did not fade. When we arrived at the temple, something felt off. There weren't many people around and the area felt strangely empty. My uncle told me to get into the queue while he submitted our bags to the cloakroom. He was only about 4 meters away when I stepped into it. And then everything changed. Out of nowhere, people began appearing. Within minutes, the single line turned into 4 or 5 dense queues. I don't understand how it happened so fast. I tried to look for my uncle through gaps in the crowd but couldn't see him anywhere, and panic set in. I began crying hard. The crowd pushed and crushed from all sides and I felt squeezed and overwhelmed, my chest tight, my jaw aching from crying so much. I was a 12-year-old, terrified, and no one seemed to be able to hear me or care. Then, someone reached me. A man around 35 years old wrapped his arms around me and lifted me up slightly, shielding me from the crowd. His face was calm, kind, and trustworthy. "Don't worry, kid. No one will hurt you while I'm here." He stayed with me in the line as it moved forward, protecting me from the shoving bodies. And as we entered the temple premises, something strange happened. Everything went quiet. I couldn't hear the crowd anymore, I could only hear his voice. And a deep calm washed over me, the fear dissolving completely. I bowed before the goddess, feeling peaceful in a way I hadn't done before. When I exited the temple, I saw my uncle standing near the announcement booth. I ran to him and hugged him tightly. He was relieved to see me too. I turned around to thank the man who had helped me, but he was gone. Not just him, the crowd had thinned out as well. It was as if he had vanished completely. I never experienced anything like that before or since. That, I believe, was my first paranormal experience. And to this day, I don't understand what really happened. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Happy New Year to you all. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's ghost stories from around the world. It's always fun to get a different perspective of ghost stories from different countries. At least I think so. If you enjoyed Fear Street's work, feel free to check him out. Link can be found down below, or shortly on screen soon. And I'd like to give one final thank you to my members and patrons, whose names can be seen on screen, for their continued support of the channel. If you would like to support the channel even further, you can follow the links down below to find out more. But that's it from me, guys. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.